I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Today we're in forward plot of the Mark 48 Rangekeeper, which would have been used for shore bombardment missions. One of the main functions of battleships, and the main reason why the Iowas were retained into the 90s, was for their shore bombardment capabilities. Simply put, the Navy gets rid of a lot of this capability post-World War II. And in today's video, I specifically want to talk about the large gun ships off Vietnam and just how few of them there were. So, as you guys already know, New Jersey is reactivated in 1968. She serves a single deployment and is decommissioned again in 1969. She is the only one of the 4 Iowa-class battleships brought back during the Vietnam War. For land artillery, about the largest size gun that is relatively mobile and out there in high numbers is the 155 millimeter gun, which is roughly 6 inches. So that's the size of the guns on a Navy light cruiser, a little bit bigger than the size of guns on a Navy destroyer. Destroyers, light cruisers, have survived in the Navy to the present day, although the last of the cruisers will be decommissioned in the next couple of years. During the entire Vietnam War, only 5 ships with guns larger than that 155 millimeter were used off the coast of Vietnam by the U.S. Navy, despite having a tremendous reserve fleet made up of these ships. So, the U.S. Navy has just a couple of classes of ships at this time. Really, you've only got 2 main types of ships: the heavy cruisers armed with their 8-inch guns, and the battleships. Most of the Navy's non-Iowa class battleships had already been gotten rid of by the time we're really escalating the war in Vietnam in the mid to late 1960s. So really, you're looking at the 4 Iowa class battleships and their 16-inch guns. The Alaska class large cruisers with their 12-inch guns, the older battleships with 14 and 16-inch 45 caliber guns are mostly gone. The Navy still has 3 classes of World War II designed cruisers in the Baltimores, the Oregon Cities, which are just a class of 3 more Baltimores with redesigned superstructures, and the 3 Des Moines class cruisers with their auto-loading 8-inch guns. A few of these World War II era cruisers, including 2 of the heavy cruisers, were upgraded to carry missiles to supplement their gun batteries. And there were some designs like this proposed for the Iowa class that were not carried out. It would have involved removing gun turrets or doing other major alterations to the ships, which were required for those older missile systems compared to the plug-and-play Tomahawks and Harpoons that the Iowas finally got in the 80s in a relatively all-store upgrade. And these were not ground attack missiles. They were surface-to-air missiles, essentially, and air defense missiles. So, during the Vietnam War, for shore bombardment, the Navy had 5 ships. New Jersey for her single deployment, the missile-armed former Baltimore-class cruisers Boston and Canberra, and the traditional Baltimore-class cruiser St. Paul, and the Des Moines-class cruiser Newport News. Those 4 heavy cruisers and that 1 battleship were the only ships with larger guns than the Army could bring to bear operating off the coast of Vietnam during the entire Vietnam War. That is wild to me. The reason New Jersey was brought back, as you all probably know at this point, is because so many of our aircraft were being shot down. North Vietnam had the most heavy and sophisticated air defense network in the world at that time. So our aircraft are being shot down. They also had a relatively good and modern corps of interceptor fighters that could dogfight and shoot down American aircraft, in addition to surface-to-air missiles and some really heavy AAA fire. North Vietnam also had possibly the most powerful coastal defense system of anywhere in the world. However, it was just regular Army type guns that were moved around between different regiments to be able to fire at ships. Again, remember, you're not moving around guns that are bigger than 155 millimeters, or I think 152 millimeters with most of the Eastern Bloc equipment that the North Vietnamese are using. So, while these guns can in theory engage destroyers and cruisers, the guns of these larger ships, the heavy cruisers and the battleships, can outrange them. Vietnam is a long strip of coastline, and most of the important infrastructure for the country is there along the coastline where it's relatively flat, as opposed to in the mountainous regions further inland. So, if I was running the Vietnam War, I would have found it far more economical to reactivate the heavy cruisers and battleships that the U.S. Navy had in reserve, as opposed to operating a bunch of World War II era aircraft carriers that are operating aircraft that keep getting shot down. Each time an aircraft is shot down, it results in captured flight crew, or has the potential to result in captured flight crew. Whereas you're not intercepting and shooting down a 16-inch shell, or an 8-inch shell for that matter. You're not capturing anyone. One crew member from one of these 5 ships was captured during the war. He fell overboard and managed to swim ashore and get picked up. And he actually, very interesting story, maybe we'll cover it in a future video. This guy is able to bring the names of all the American POWs home because he's released early. So very interesting story, very successful. You lose far less Americans, put far less Americans in harm's way by putting these heavy gunships on the line. Why does the Navy keep one standard Baltimore, one standard Des Moines, and one Iowa class in commission? Like, it makes sense that they have the 2 missile-armed cruisers, Boston and Canberra. Like, any of the ships that are missile-armed, even if they still partially retain their World War II batteries, are kept in service. But why do I think the Navy, which is very focused on economy at this time, why would they keep ships of different classes which require different supply chains around? Especially given, you would say, okay, well, if you've got one Iowa out there, then you've still got 3 Iowas sitting around at home to strip parts off of to keep this older ship going. If you've got one Des Moines out there, you've still got 2 Des Moines at home to strip parts off of. No, those were reserve assets, so you weren't supposed to strip parts off of them. The crew of New Jersey totally did, but they weren't supposed to. These ships were supposed to be kept intact in case the war escalates and they're brought in to service. So you're still making new parts for these ships rather than stripping them. So there's no extra economy there. The only reason I can think of is you are keeping a set of sailors trained on each of these separate classes. The Baltimore and Oregon City class, the Des Moines class, and the Iowa class, by keeping one ship of each of those classes out there. St. Paul for the Baltimore, Oregon cities, Newport News for the Des Moines, and New Jersey for the Iowas. So that if you decide to escalate the war, well, then you've already got a core of experienced sailors on those ships to send to the other 3 or 4 of the class that you might be reactivating. How important was shore bombardment during the Vietnam War? During World War II, when the U.S. Navy was at its largest, we fired a peak of about 111,000 rounds from 8-inch and larger guns in a single year. There were 400 guns of that caliber in the fleet, which meant just about 270 shells per barrel. Keep in mind, the lifespan of a barrel on an Iowa-class battleship, 300 rounds. In 1968, the most intensive year of the Vietnam War for naval bombardment, the U.S. Navy fired 65,000 rounds from 8-inch guns. New Jersey hadn't been brought back in at this point. They only had 30 8-inch guns in the fleet, which meant an almost 10 times increase in the number of shells per barrel, 2,170 between the 30 barrels, which meant you're wearing out those barrels fast. You've got to replace those barrels as opposed to distributing around the fleet. You're wearing out the entire ship faster than the other ones. And as things wear out, you have more chance of something going wrong. For example, Newport News suffers an explosion in one of her gun barrels. I can't say for sure if that is because the gun was worn out or overused, but that's a theory that has popped up. 2 of the heavy cruisers were home ported out of Norfolk in the Atlantic Fleet, 2 of the heavy cruisers out of Long Beach with the Pacific Fleet, and they would each do about 7 months off the coast of Vietnam. And that's similar. New Jersey gets re-home ported from Philadelphia, where she's in mothballs, to Long Beach, does a approximately 7-month deployment, and then goes home. So you spend about 7 months out of the year on the gun line, then you go back to your home port for maintenance and training, and then you go back out there. So New Jersey's experience is very similar to these other ships, except they get multiple deployments and we do not. As we start to de-escalate the war, in 1969, New Jersey's name is at the very top of the list for ships to be decommissioned. At the top of the list in 1970, Boston and Canberra. In 1971, St. Paul. She was fitted out as a fleet flagship, which gave her some extra utility over her sister ships. And in 1975, Newport News is decommissioned, leaving the fleet without any significant shore bombardment capability. So the thesis to this, I guess, is that shore bombardment could have been way more successful during the Vietnam War, and it could have saved a lot of pilots if we had started to bring back some of the roughly 20 to 30 other large gun ships instead of only using the 5 that had been retained in active service for whatever reason. However, just like aircraft had trouble finding purchase in the years leading up to World War II because of the quote-unquote gun club in the Navy, the shore bombardment folks had trouble getting purchase in the years after World War II when air power had proven its effectiveness. And as those air power people took over the fleet, controlled the budgeting, they continued to spend more money on new aircraft and pilot training as opposed to reactivating more of the older gunships, distributing the wear and tear on those ships, and providing more ships off the coast of Vietnam to provide shore bombardment support to help the troops ashore. What do you think are some mistakes of the Vietnam War? Try and limit it to naval stuff, otherwise the list is too long to recount. But let us know in the comment section down below. Do you think all 4 Iowa-class battleships should have been sent over to Vietnam? Let us know down below. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support. There's a link in the description below if you'd like to donate to support the museum and our channel. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about us and the museum. Thanks for watching.